Welcome in, race fans, to this edition of Through the Gears, presented by Front Stretch. I'm your host, Tino, and I can't wait to get back into the NASCAR racing, betting, and winning action as we secured the dub in Michigan last weekend, betting on Tyler Reddick to come home with the victory, and he did just that. We'll get into more of that a little bit later on in the show, but first, before we get into everything we need to talk about, preparing for the Daytona Coke 0400 this weekend, a true summer classic, one of my favorite races. I got to give a special shout out to some of the people that commented on last week's episode. Shout out to Marcus, shout out to Kai Fried, and shout out to Janet Barker. Really appreciate all the support that you guys show and any of the comments that you have, whether it's questions, picks, or anything in between. Be sure to comment down below. You'll get a shout out and you'll get a response from me. I always check. Be sure to like them, message you guys back. Interacting with the community is one of my favorite things to do. So I'm super excited to talk more with you guys, to let you know who I'm betting on this weekend for Daytona. So without further ado, let's go through the gears. Time for the Michigan recap, and what a race it was. I was super pumped to see us getting Tyler Reddick at 11-1 earlier that week, securing him when we were talking about him during the show, and obviously locking in the win there was huge. Not only that, but we had some of the props fall our way too. Gotta give a special shout out to Wyatt Watson, who was on the program last week. Me and him talked about these bets. Our betting cards lined up really well together. We had the same mindset. We shared most of the same picks, if not all of them, and me and him brought home the cash for ourselves, but also you guys, and that to me is the most important part. I'm here to make the best money we can for you guys, the most educated picks, give you guys all the insight and analysis you need to place your own bets, to gain some confidence, maybe where I'm betting on, and maybe something that could sway you in a certain different direction in order to profit the most every single weekend. So I feel like we did a great job of that. It was one of our more complete weekends. I talked about Tyler Reddick getting the outright win, and the other guys on our betting card, at least for me, was Chris Buescher, Christopher Bell, MTJ. Martin Truex Jr. was there until the end. Reddick ultimately ended up passing him to be one of the top Toyotas in the field. If it had not been Truex, he did get into the wall as well. But really, I think it was a battle between those two. William Byron was in the mix there too. Bubba Wallace looked like he had a shot. We had him at as a top 5 prop. Ultimately didn't come through because he was involved in that wreck, as was the other outright winners we had. So I was really glad Tyler Reddick was able to rise to the front. Now we saw a double overtime too. Not something that I normally want to see, because most times, the leader in that situation does not come home with the victory, and the leader is someone that we had bet on. But in this case scenario, it was perfect for us. We got the Daniel Suarez top 10 prop that was locked in. We also doubled down with the Tyler Reddick as a top 5 prop as well. And my man Wyatt also mentioned Carson Hocevar for a top 10, and he came home with the 10th place finish. Shout out to Chris Buescher too for rebounding at Michigan. Was involved in that wreck, like I mentioned. Was able to bring it home in 6th place. Ty Gibbs 3rd, Byron 2nd, and Brad Keselowski 5th. Kyle Busch 4th, though. That's a main one that I want to talk about, because I think they took a step in the right direction at that race for RCR. Busch drove the wheels off that thing, as I feel like he does every week. They don't have the speed most times to provide them with the finishes, and now, after we saw Austin Dillon win, and yes, crash at Richmond, but ultimately he did have the fastest car that night, Kyle Busch gets leads laps, puts himself in position to potentially win that race. They were also on, tire strategy and everything like that, taking 2 tires, taking no tires at times, putting himself towards the front. But that's what they really need to do in these situations if they're going to make the playoffs. We're going to be talking about him a lot in this week's episode, so I'm excited to see that they may have momentum going into Daytona, and I was really happy with Michigan. We made a lot of profit based off of our picks, and I'm looking forward to having another great weekend in Daytona. How can we prep for this one? How can we break this down? Well, to me, I know a lot of people like to say that this is chaos, this is a random race, this is, anyone's can win it and will win it and everything like that, and I do obviously think that's true. I mean, this is a super speedway race. This is a chance where underdogs and long shots can win. But I will also say I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of prep. I've analyzed a lot of data. And I think there are some drivers that have rose to the top in super speedway races this season. I'm going to break it down for you guys here in this one. And this is sort of what I did for my prep. Now, comparable tracks, Obviously, Talladega, Atlanta as well can now be on the board. Daytona 500 earlier this year. That's really where I'm looking at the most. Last year's race, sure, for it was last year's Daytona, but I really think this year's races on the super speedways play more of a factor, in my opinion, because of the way the cars raced. We're seeing fuel strategy come into play. We're seeing guys maybe make less moves because they don't want to wreck. They want to keep their stage points. They want to ride until the very end because they know if they step out of line, they could get shoveled to the back, and no one's really willing to risk that with these new next-gen cars and everything like that. Everyone's sort of stuck together in these packs, and I think that's something, when you add the fuel mileage play with it now, something we haven't really seen at super speedways in the past, but this year it's been really prominent. I also want to note, playoff cut line. I mean, that's a huge thing to keep in mind for this race. There's only 2 races left until the NASCAR playoffs. Let's talk about that in this one because I think it's going to make a big key. So Ty Gibbs in 14th. He's plus 39. Chris Buescher plus 16 and 15th. 16th Chastain plus 1. Bubba Wallace in 17th minus 1. And then we have Kyle Busch looking like a win to get in at minus 93 and 18th. So here, knowing what the bubble looks like, these are drivers that we have to keep in mind. And also, when we take a look at these super speedway races, to me, when I was growing up watching the sport, being a fan of it, consuming almost every single race every single year, I knew that these super speedway races could be a potential for 100-to-1 winners. We saw David Reagan, right? We see Ricky Stenhouse Jr. back in the day when he was winning his second career race at Daytona in this same track, in this same race. To me, we're not seeing that too much anymore. We're seeing Ryan Blaney. We're seeing Denny Hamlin. Are we going to see the same drivers rise to the top in this one? Or will we see a long shot winner be able to capitalize on where they're at below the playoff cut line or even above it and locking themselves into the NASCAR playoffs if they aren't already? Here's the prep and the major stat I have going into this one for you guys. Only 6 drivers in the entire field have finished inside the top 12 in multiple super speedway races thus far this season. So there's been 3, Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta. And to me, I think that's huge to note because in those 3 races, yes, obviously you can have different turnaround, different types of cars leading, different wrecks, different guys being shuffled around. But if those 6 drivers have been able to maintain the top 12 to 10 finishing positions every time, or at least multiple times when other drivers haven't, that to me shows that they are performing well at this type of racetrack, performing well in the pack, drafting well, being able to make the most, maybe it's preserving their car till the end, having a clean race car, not getting caught up in any damage, and being able to capitalize on a top 10 finish. That's huge for me. I'll name the drivers now. William Byron, Alex Bowman, Bubba Wallace, Noah Gragson, Chase Briscoe, and Kyle Busch are them. And I think that's going to be big to note because when we take a look at the odds in just a bit, when we take a look at who's on my outright winner betting card, I'll mention those drivers again. I need to allude to the 2 of them because I feel like that's who everyone's going to be talking about this week. Kyle Busch is the first one. Kyle Busch in this one, he finished 3rd at Atlanta. We saw that finish. We know that finish. The 3-wide photo finish, reminiscent of the movie Cars, right? He was 0.007 seconds away from locking himself into the NASCAR playoffs. Ultimately, does not pass Ryan Blaney for second, who was 0.003. Does not pass Daniel Suarez, who ended up getting the victory in that one. But Kyle Busch has been strong on the super speedways, not only this season, but recently in his career. And I feel like if he's going to make the playoffs, if he's going to keep the streak alive of winning in consecutive seasons in his career, it is going to have to happen at Daytona this weekend. I've been saying it all year too. I say do not count out Kyle Busch because I feel like I have that feeling that he can win this weekend. And I know most people are probably thinking the same thing as well. We'll see if the sports books are thinking that too. But one other driver I need to mention when it comes to my prep, this is what I wrote down. Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace, not only 1 top 5 finish this year, but 2. A 5th place finish in the Daytona 500 and a 5th place finish at Atlanta. At Talladega, it looked like those Toyotas had the best fuel mileage strategy going. The pack of those Toyotas was running, and they were, when everything had cycled out, they were going to be the lead pack of cars. That 23 car was going to be in position for another top 5 finish, it looked like, until they got into a wreck. So to me, That shows that, yes, obviously anything can happen during these races. But when you take a look at those 6 drivers that I mentioned, they've consistently performed at super speedways multiple times this year. Heading back to another one, the 4th time this year, the 2nd time at Daytona, I think they'll be able to capitalize once again. Taking a look at our odds breakdown here now, I'm going to also be using the Action Network to help us out now so you guys can be able to shop around and get the best value. Most times I'm taking a look at the DraftKings Sportsbook as they are the official sportsbook of NASCAR, but here I feel like this could be a better way to provide you guys with the best value, to know which sportsbook to get your value from, that is, and also to shop around and have a clear reminder of that. Shopping around is huge. If you want a better value, if a driver is 15-1 on one book and 12-1 on another, you're going to want the higher value. So I'll be able to provide that for you guys now here. Okay, our favorites in this one are going to be Denny Hamlin. It's going to be Joey Logano, and it's going to be Ryan Blaney, each driver listed at plus 1,300. And to me, that's fair. An initial look at that, I feel like that's okay. I think normally Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin, and Joey Logano are always towards the front in this one. Ryan Blaney, to me, is the best super speedway racer on the grid right now. Denny Hamlin could also be in that conversation, and I'm sure Joey Logano too. With Ryan Blaney winning 3 super speedway races in the last 4 seasons, that's no question. His consistency, he's always able to make the best moves to get himself towards the front when he needs to. If he can stay out of trouble, I think he can win this race. Then we see Brad Keselowski at plus 1,500 via FanDuel. I think that's fair odds for Brad, as he is one of the best super speedway racers on the grid right now. Moving on from him, it's his RFK teammate in Chris Buescher, plus 1,600 for Buescher at BetMGM. Also fair value. I feel like the only reason why that is higher than Brad is because he won this race last year. Hard to go back-to-back at Daytona, but if you're a believer in Buescher to get it done again, I like that value there. And now, the man of the week is going to be Kyle Busch. Plus 1,600 on BetMGM for Busch. Opened at plus 1,300, so to see that line and the value be up on some sports books, plus 1,200 on FanDuel. So if you want the value, BetMGM has it there. I feel like that's really good value for Kyle Busch. Despite them having a bad year, okay, I said really good value, but that's for what the sports books are going to give you. I think for me, if I were to pick a number for Kyle Busch, I'd like to see an 18-1, 20-1 because of the year they're having. But with everyone sort of thinking the same thing, that he's due, that he could come clutch in this one, and that everything, could go their way on the super speedway race, and them being strong on the super speedways in general, I think that 16-1 number is the best you're going to be able to get for him this weekend. Then we see some Hendrick drivers with value. William Byron plus 1,800. Chase Elliott plus 1,800 via DraftKings. Kyle Larson plus 1,900 via FanDuel. Kyle Larson, he's trying to prove himself. He's always in the front, leading at some times, and you're like, okay, could this be the race? Kyle Larson gets it done, and he ultimately wrecks out because if he's not winning, he's wrecking. And that's normally every week, and the chances are just that much higher at a super speedway race here like Daytona. There's going to be a lot of chaos, and who thrives and who can weather the storm through the chaos? That's Bubba Wallace. Plus 2,000 for him to win this race outright on Caesars Sportsbook. Love the odds there for Bubba because I mentioned the 2 top 5s earlier. He's just good at these tracks. I mean, that's just all it is to it. Bubba just races well, and if he needs to be aggressive, he can be, and I think he will be in this race. His teammate Tyler Reddick, also plus 2,000, won a super speedway race at Talladega earlier this season. Christopher Bell at 22-1 via FanDuel, and Martin Truex Jr., 22-1 on most books. I'm looking at BetMGM here for him. Now I would say we get into long shot territory. Ross Chastain, 26-1. He may need to win to get into the NASCAR playoffs based off of where he is each and every week around that playoff cut line. I think 26-1 is fair value for Ross, but at the same time, he's one of those drivers that can get too aggressive and potentially take himself out by being in a wreck or also starting the wreck himself. So just be aware of that. Be cautious of Ross from that standpoint. Alex Bowman, 28-1, almost won the Daytona 500. So that number's via DraftKings. I kind of like that number for Bowman. I won't be betting on him myself. I'll give that away for the outright winners. I don't think Bowman could get it done in this one, but at the same time, he is really going strong in terms of his super speedway driving ability so far this season and what we've seen in the past from Bowman as well. Michael McDowell, 30-1. Austin Cindric, 35-1. Ty Gibbs, 30-1. I don't really like Ty Gibbs in this one. I feel like the inexperience has shown at super speedways for him. He's just not the best when it comes to these types of races. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at 35-1 via Caesars. I like those odds for Ricky. He was 40-1 when he won the Daytona 500 last season, so I think he can get it done. And then take a look at more of the long shots value-wise. Austin Dillon, 40-1. Eric Jones, same value. Noah Gragson, 45. Todd Gilliland, 50. Chase Briscoe, 41 as well. Pretty low odds for him. I wouldn't really touch that for me personally. I feel like he deserves to be in the 50 to 55-1 category there. Daniel Suarez is surprising at 50-1 considering he won at Atlanta earlier this season. Corey LaJoie, 50-1. That to me too is a tough one because I feel like he should be a little bit higher than that in order for you to make value and return on your investment in betting on a driver like Corey LaJoie. Ryan Preece, 75-1. Josh Berry, 60-1. Justin Haley, 75-1. Carson Hocevar, 75-1. Austin Hill racing in this one, 90-1. John Hunter Nemechek, 80-1. Harrison Burton, 80-1. Zane Smith, 85. Daniel Hemrick, 100-1. And Shane Van Gisbergen, 125-1. I think that's where we'll stop. But hey, SVG could get it done on a super speedway. Time for the outright winners. This is what you guys came here to see. Who am I betting on to win this race outright? I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm not scared to bet super speedway races. If I have a feeling a driver's going to win, I do the research, I do the analysis to base my picks off of that. Sure, are these races harder to predict? Are they, quote, unpredictable type of tracks and races that we've seen in the super speedways? Yes. But that's my job, is to predict the unpredictable, to predict who's going to win each week to make us money. So I'm not scared to throw some picks out there for you. I got units on outright drivers. Sure, will there be some long shots you guys may want to sprinkle on? I'll touch on them. You know, I just listed out everyone's value for you too. If anyone caught your eye, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions about them, if I don't touch on them, if they're not on my outright betting card. But I'm going to give you the picks how I see fit. I'm not going to be betting on every single driver either. I want to narrow it down so we can make profit and we can also have some fun in this one. So to me, first up, Ryan Blaney. I mentioned him before. He's won 3 super speedway races in the last 4 years. Ford is always strong at this type of racetrack. He was up front at this race last season before getting involved in an accident. 13-1 for him, I feel like it's fair value as he is one of the favorites at this track. Next up is the driver we alluded to throughout the entire show, and that's Kyle Busch. 16-1 for Kyle Busch. I think that's okay value there, but he's a driver I just can't miss out on winning a race. I talked about him all throughout the year on other shows and even in this show saying I need to wait, I need to wait. Well, last week, they actually did prove something to us. He had a top 5 finish. They took a step in the right direction. Now, Michigan also has high speeds. It's not necessarily comparable to that of Daytona, with Daytona being a super speedway race. But at the same time, this is a track where we've seen Kyle Busch perform at before. He's been able to get clutch victories to keep his winning streak alive. And I just can't miss out on Kyle Busch if he does win this race. So to me, 16-1, Kyle Busch, he's on the outright winners card. But that's not all. That's not the only driver we talked about earlier. Bubba Wallace is the other one. 20-1 for Bubba. 2 top 5s in super speedways this year. He's been clutch when it comes time to race his way into the playoffs. And the only other thing that I haven't mentioned yet too, his owner of 2311 Racing is Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin was on record saying last season that if it came down to pushing Ty Gibbs or Bubba Wallace into the NASCAR playoffs at Daytona, he would push Bubba Wallace. Now, it is important to note that Denny Hamlin was hit with a major penalty this past weekend. So maybe that sort of diminishes that mindset a little bit with Denny trying to go and win for his own. But if it's late in the going and the 11 is behind the 23 and the 45 car won at Talladega earlier this season, I just think it's a perfect storm to help the 23 car get into the playoffs in this one. The mindset shouldn't have really changed for Hamlin either because the storylines are the same. Bubba Wallace last year was on the outside looking in or right around that playoff bubble. Now, yes, we have one more race to go at Darlington before the NASCAR playoffs and before everything is set in stone. But in this one, it's got to be the same type of aggression. It's got to be the same type of urgency out of that team to just go all out, race your race. I don't think they're going to be racing for points. If you race for points and you're too patient, you get caught up in a wreck. So I think Bubba Wallace will try to dictate, the lead in this race, try to get up front, and the 11 and the 45, both shown to be winners on super speedways, can help Bubba Wallace get back to victory lane And he could just win for himself too. Like, he is capable of getting up there. But I also think the teammates and the help from the Toyota drivers is going to be necessary for him to maintain that track position. This next driver may surprise you. Martin Truex Jr. does not have the finishes at superspeedway for me to even back up any of what I'm about to say. He is not a superspeedway driver, or at least known for winning on superspeedways, because he hasn't yet in his career. Well, in this final full-time season, in what could be his final Daytona summer race, at least that is, Martin Truex Jr. is 22-1 to win this race. Let me throw some knowledge at you here. Truex is the only driver in the entire field to finish every single lap at Daytona and Talladega in the last 10 races in the Gen 7 car at these super speedway tracks. Now, those finishes, back half of the, lead lap cars, maybe 20th, 25th, top 10 maybe if he's lucky. But last year, I watched that race back. Martin Truex Jr. was fighting for the regular season championship. He won stage 2 of the race. He was in the top 10 for most of the day. If anything, I think the thing that hurt him was not having Toyota teammates to help him get back towards the front. The Fords really dictated that race towards the end. Well, if he does have the teammates and he does have the help, I think MTJ could win this thing. Call me crazy. Call me a madman. But I think he really has a shot to do it. What storybook would that be too, right? To see MTJ potentially get his final career victory at Daytona in the summer when he's already having what seems to be enough points to make it into the NASCAR playoffs. Why not go all out? It's a crazy play, but I'm taking it 22-1 for Martin Truex Jr. to win it. Call me crazy, but I think that's what makes me a winner occasionally in the NASCAR Cup Series. So the other driver I will mention in this one is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I think he needs to be taken a look at. I'm not sure. I don't think he'll be on my outright card as much as the other guys. I may throw a little bit of a sprinkle on him because I mentioned it. I don't want to bet on every driver in this one. I understand the unpredictability of it and the chaos that can happen, but I also want to keep my units, considerably at a low rate compared to the other drivers in the field that may present value, because at the same time, although they present value, they may not come through for the win. I like Ricky always at super speedways. 35-1 is good value for him. If that's something you guys want to take a sprinkle on, he would be my favorite long shot play for the outright winner. It's time to take a look at some prop bets. I will mention in this one, this is a week at Daytona and a super speedway track where I'm less heavy in terms of my prop betting. In this one, I'm only going to be taking a look at some top 10s, maybe 1 or 2 top 5 finishers. But in most weeks, I'd present a lot in terms of the values that they can say or have in this one. And to me, it's not just something that I feel comfortable betting with in this one. Anything's going to have to be plus money, as we normally like, but for the top 10 guys, especially with everything that can happen at these type of racetracks, it just makes the most sense to be aware of that in terms of the prop bets. And for me, to kind of scale back a little bit in terms of having a light week when it comes to betting on the guys to finish inside the top 5 or top 10 in this one. We talked about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. For him to get a top 10 in this one is plus 200 via Brett Rivers. I feel like that is fair value. I also see Eric Jones at the same price at the same book, and Chase Briscoe. I feel like those 3 drivers have what it takes to get it inside the top 10 here. But if you like some drivers for higher value, I would definitely go with Justin Haley at plus 330. I love this play via FanDuel because he's just a driver that in the Xfinity Series especially shown to be really strong at super speedways. Now, another thing that's important to note too, with Rick Ware Racing, they do have a technical alliance with Brad Keselowski and RFK. So to me, I feel like with him being in a Ford, it can definitely help him to have more of an advantage, more teammates out there. And I think he could be a good pusher and also maybe at the end be in position with having help from those Fords to get in the front. And definitely a top 10, I feel like at that value is fair for Justin Haley. Shane Van Gisbergen's another guy. And the last one I'll mention here at plus 325 via BetMGM. I like SVG to have a strong race in this one. Yes, he's not that comfortable in the Cup cars on super speedways just yet. But if he's learning, he's going to have to experience the draft, see how everything's playing out, and he'll be doing that, I expect, from the back of the pack, from trying to, not get into too much damage or trouble right away, but ultimately push the issue when he's ready to. And I feel like from that standpoint, if he's in the back of the pack, learning about the draft, learning how the cars react, if the big one happens, I feel like it's inevitable, and a big wreck takes out 10, 20 drivers, SVG might see himself towards the end of the race inside or around the top 10 with a clean race car. And to me, that's really all you can ask for at an unpredictable track like this. Give me SVG plus 325 to be in the right place at the right time in this track and in that 16 car as well, which has shown some speed in these super speedways in the past as well. To close things out for my favorite plays in this one, it's gonna be Bubba Wallace. The stats don't lie. 2 top 5 finishes at super speedways this season with how strong he has been at these tracks in the past, and having Denny Hamlin's help as well as Tyler Reddick, who's won at Talladega earlier this season. I think that 23 car, who has been clutch in the past in terms of making the NASCAR playoffs, can do so again this season. Give me Bubba Wallace. 20-1 is great value. Hop on that now because qualifying doesn't really matter. So to me, I'm willing to place my bets now. You know, you can even wait till after, but I wouldn't really expect the lines to change too much. So I'd feel confident about betting on these drivers now before qualifying happens and before the race on Saturday night. That'll do it for this edition of Through the Gears presented by Front Stretch. Really appreciate everyone who's tuning in. Let me know who you think is going to win the race in the comments down below. I'll be sure to answer any questions you guys may have, and I hope you enjoyed the analysis and breakdown. I know it could be such an unpredictable race at these super speedways, but I feel like there are some trends that I was able to find that may help us try to predict the winners in this one. I hope we can continue the winning ways of profit too, like we have seen us be able to conquer Indy and Michigan recently. So I'm really glad we are on the right track to having a successful and profitable season in terms of the NASCAR betting. Be sure to stick around for the Stock Car Scoop, which comes out Saturday night rather, after the NASCAR racing action. And be sure to tune in to the Daytona Coke 0400, a summer classic, which is once again Saturday night. And be sure to tune into my social media at Tino, Pattigno, Pattigno, right there on the bottom of the screen there. If I have any updates to my betting card, I'll be sure to let you guys know there, as well as, anything other content that I'll be producing throughout the race weekend. So be sure to tune in there. I'll see you guys next week as we go through the gears.